Marcus Chen stood in the grand lobby of Chen Industries, his leather shoes clicking against the marble floor as he moved toward the elevator. At 42 years old, he had built an empire that spanned 3 continents. His tech company had partnerships in Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen. Everyone knew Marcus Chen spoke perfect Mandarin, a skill he had mastered during his 7 years living in China before returning to America. His phone buzzed with another meeting reminder. Marcus loosened his tie slightly as the elevator climbed to the top floor. Being a single father and a CEO meant his schedule was always packed. His daughter Emma was 8 years old now, and he tried his best to be present in her life, despite the demands of running a billion-dollar company. When Marcus arrived home that evening, he found his daughter sitting at the kitchen table with their new housekeeper, Grace. He had hired Grace 3 weeks ago after his previous nanny had to move back to her home country. Grace was a black woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Her resume had been impressive, with years of experience caring for children in wealthy households. She came with glowing references and seemed perfect for the job. Emma was working on her homework while Grace prepared dinner. The smell of roasted chicken filled the house. Marcus dropped his briefcase by the door and walked into the kitchen. Emma looked up and smiled at her father. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail and she had a pencil tucked behind her ear. Grace greeted Marcus warmly and asked about his day. She had a slight southern accent that reminded him of his college years in Georgia. There was something comforting about having Grace in the house. She brought a warmth that had been missing since Emma's mother had passed away 4 years ago in a car accident. Over the next few weeks, Marcus noticed that Emma seemed happier. She laughed more and seemed less lonely when he had to work late. Grace had a way with children that was natural and genuine. She helped Emma with her homework, played board games with her, and even taught her how to bake cookies from scratch. One Saturday morning, Marcus decided to work from home. He set up his laptop in the study, which was just down the hall from the kitchen. He was reviewing contracts when he heard Emma's laughter floating through the house. It made him smile. His daughter's happiness was worth more than any business deal. As he worked, Marcus could hear the faint sounds of Grace and Emma talking in the kitchen. They seemed to be having a conversation while making lunch. He tried to focus on the numbers on his screen, but something caught his attention. The rhythm of their voices seemed different somehow. He paused and listened more carefully. Marcus pushed his chair back and walked quietly toward the kitchen. He stood in the hallway where he could hear them clearly but remained out of sight. What he heard next made his blood run cold. Grace was speaking Mandarin. Not just a few words, but flowing natural Mandarin with perfect pronunciation and the correct Beijing accent. His heart pounded in his chest. Marcus strained to hear more. Grace was asking Emma questions in Mandarin about her day, about her school, about her friends. The questions seemed innocent enough on the surface, but there was something deliberate about them. She was gathering information systematically, like someone conducting an interview. What shocked Marcus even more was that Emma was responding. Not in broken Mandarin or simple phrases, but in complete sentences with proper grammar. His daughter, who had never taken a single Mandarin lesson in her life, was speaking the language fluently. Marcus felt his hands go cold. He had never taught Emma Mandarin. After her mother died, he had deliberately kept that part of his life separate. His business dealings in China were something he never discussed at home. Emma had never shown any interest in learning the language, and he had never pushed it. He stepped back from the hallway, his mind racing. Who was Grace really? Why was she speaking Mandarin to his daughter? And how on earth had Emma learned to speak it so well without him knowing? Marcus returned to his study and closed the door quietly. He sat down at his desk, but he could no longer focus on work. His instincts, honed from years of negotiating complex business deals, told him something was very wrong. He pulled out his phone and opened his security app. 6 months ago, he had installed cameras throughout the house for safety reasons. He had never thought he would need to actually review the footage. His fingers trembled slightly as he scrolled back through the recordings. He started with the previous week, watching at double speed. The footage showed Grace and Emma doing normal activities, cooking, playing games, watching television. But then he noticed something. Whenever Marcus was not home, Grace would take Emma into the study, his private study where he kept files related to his business. Marcus slowed the playback to normal speed. He watched as Grace carefully went through papers on his desk while Emma stood watch by the door. She was teaching his daughter to be a lookout. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Grace was not just a housekeeper. She was a spy, and she had been using his own daughter to gather intelligence about his company. He scrolled through more footage from different days. The pattern was always the same. Grace would speak to Emma in Mandarin, teaching her the language while simultaneously coaching her on what to look for in Marcus's papers. She was training his 8-year-old daughter to be an accomplice in corporate espionage. Marcus felt sick. He thought about all the sensitive documents he had brought home over the past 3 weeks. Information about upcoming mergers, proprietary technology designs, client lists, financial projections. All of it had been sitting in his study, accessible to someone he had trusted to care for his child. He checked the date when Grace had started working for them, 3 weeks and 2 days ago. He pulled up his business calendar and cross-referenced it with the surveillance footage. Grace had started just 2 days before he brought home the preliminary contracts for his company's biggest deal yet, a partnership with a major Chinese telecommunications firm worth over $2 billion. This was not a coincidence. Someone had planted Grace in his household specifically to steal those documents. The question was, who was she working for? A rival company? A foreign government? Industrial espionage was not uncommon in the tech industry, but this was personal. They had invaded his home and manipulated his daughter. Marcus closed his laptop and sat in the darkness of his study. He needed to think carefully about his next move. If he confronted Grace directly, she might disappear, and he would never know who was behind this. If he called the police immediately, it might spark an investigation that could damage his company's reputation and scare off potential business partners. He also had to think about Emma. His daughter had been unknowingly caught up in something dangerous. How much did she understand about what was happening? Had Grace threatened her, manipulated her? The thought of his little girl being used in this way made anger surge through his chest. Marcus made a decision. He would not let Grace know that he had discovered the truth. Not yet. He needed to gather more information to find out exactly what had been compromised and who was pulling the strings. He would play along, act normal, and use the next few days to build a case. But first, he needed to secure his most sensitive documents and alert his head of security at the office. This was bigger than just his family now. If someone was willing to go to these lengths to spy on him, his entire company could be at risk. Marcus walked out of his study with a forced smile on his face. He found Grace and Emma still in the kitchen, now working together to make sandwiches for lunch. His daughter looked up at him with bright eyes, completely unaware of the storm brewing in her father's mind. He complimented Grace on how well she was taking care of Emma. Grace smiled warmly and thanked him, her English perfect and her demeanor completely natural. If Marcus had not heard her speaking Mandarin just minutes ago, he would never have suspected anything was wrong. She was a professional, he realized. Whoever had sent her had trained her well. That afternoon, Marcus suggested they all go to the park. He wanted to observe Grace more carefully in a neutral environment. As they walked through the tree-lined paths, he watched how she interacted with Emma. She was attentive and caring, pushing Emma on the swings and laughing at her jokes. It would have been a perfect family scene if not for the dark truth lurking beneath the surface. While Emma played on the jungle gym, Marcus sat on a bench next to Grace. He made casual conversation, asking about her background and her previous employers. Grace answered smoothly, her story consistent with what she had told him during the interview. She had grown up in Mississippi, moved to Atlanta for work, and had been a nanny for over 20 years. Everything sounded believable. Marcus decided to test her. He casually mentioned that he had a business trip to Shanghai coming up next month. He watched Grace's face carefully for any reaction. There was the briefest flicker of interest in her eyes before she smiled and asked if he traveled to China often. He confirmed that he did, keeping his tone light and casual. Grace nodded and changed the subject, asking if Emma could have ice cream. That night, after Emma was asleep, Marcus sat in his home office with his head of security on a video call. David Park had worked for Chen Industries for 8 years and had previously been with the FBI. If anyone could help Marcus handle this situation discreetly, it was David. Marcus explained everything he had discovered. David listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When Marcus finished, David was quiet for a moment before speaking. He told Marcus that corporate espionage cases like this were becoming more common in the tech industry. Foreign governments and rival companies were willing to invest significant resources to steal valuable information. David advised Marcus to not confront Grace yet. Instead, they needed to set a trap. He would send over a private investigator to dig into Grace's real background. In the meantime, Marcus should act completely normal at home. David also suggested that Marcus start leaving fake documents in his study, documents that contained false information about company plans. If Grace took the bait and passed along the fake intel, they could trace where it went. The next morning, Marcus followed David's advice. He printed out realistic-looking contracts and financial reports, all containing deliberately incorrect information. He left them on his desk where Grace would easily find them. Then he went to work as usual, trying to act as if nothing had changed. At the office, Marcus struggled to concentrate. His mind kept returning to Emma. How had his daughter learned Mandarin so quickly and so well? Children were fast learners, but 3 weeks was not enough time to become fluent unless she had been studying intensively every single day. The more he thought about it, the more questions arose. That evening, Marcus came home early. He announced that he had finished work ahead of schedule and suggested they have a family dinner together. Grace seemed pleased and offered to cook something special. As she worked in the kitchen, Marcus took the opportunity to spend time alone with his daughter. He sat with Emma in the living room and gently asked her about her day. Emma chatted happily about her classes and her friends. Then Marcus casually asked if Grace had been teaching her anything new. Emma's face lit up with excitement. She said Grace had been teaching her games and songs. Marcus pressed a little further, asking what language the songs were in. Emma hesitated for just a moment. Marcus could see the conflict in her young face. Finally, she whispered that the songs were in Chinese. She looked worried, as if she had revealed a secret she was supposed to keep. Marcus hugged her and told her it was okay, that he was not angry. He asked why she had not told him before. Emma explained that Grace had said it would be a special surprise. Grace told her they were practicing so Emma could impress her daddy with a song in Chinese for his birthday next month. The story sounded innocent enough, but Marcus knew better. Grace had manipulated his daughter into keeping secrets from him. Marcus asked Emma to sing one of the songs Grace had taught her. His daughter's voice was sweet and clear as she sang a traditional Chinese folk song. Her pronunciation was nearly perfect, far better than what a child could achieve in just 3 weeks of casual lessons. Someone had been teaching Emma Mandarin for much longer than Grace had been in their home. The realization hit Marcus hard. Grace was not the beginning of this operation. She was just the latest phase. Someone had been targeting his family for months, maybe longer. But who? And how had they gotten to Emma without him noticing? That night, after dinner and after Emma had gone to bed, Marcus checked his security footage again. This time he went back further, months before Grace had arrived. He watched hours of recordings, searching for anything unusual. His previous nanny, Maria, appeared in the footage. She had been with them for 2 years before suddenly leaving to return to the Philippines 3 weeks ago. Marcus studied Maria's interactions with Emma. Nothing seemed suspicious at first, but then he noticed something odd. On several occasions, Maria had taken Emma to the park at specific times. Marcus zoomed in on the footage and saw that Maria would meet another woman at the park, an Asian woman who would play with Emma while Maria sat on a nearby bench, his hands clenched into fists. The woman in the footage would spend 30 or 40 minutes with Emma, always speaking and playing with her. Marcus could not hear what they were saying, but he could guess. That woman had been teaching Emma Mandarin. Maria had been facilitating these meetings, acting as a middleman. This operation had been planned for a long time. Someone had compromised his previous nanny, used her to start teaching Emma Mandarin through these park meetings, and then replaced her with Grace to complete the mission. The level of planning and patience involved was staggering. Marcus forwarded the footage to David immediately. Within hours, David called back with news. The private investigator had started digging into Grace's background. The name and social security number she had provided were real, but they belonged to a different Grace Washington who had died 5 years ago in Louisiana. The woman in Marcus's house was using a dead person's identity. David explained that this was a common tactic in espionage. Stealing the identity of a deceased person provided a believable cover story that could withstand basic background checks. The real question was who this woman really was and who she was working for. Marcus felt the walls closing in. His home, the place where he should have felt safest, had been compromised. His daughter had been manipulated by multiple people over an extended period. And somewhere out there, someone was collecting information about his business, his deals, and his life. The next day, Marcus decided to take more drastic action. He told Grace that he needed to bring work home that evening and would be in his study for several hours. He made sure to emphasize that the documents were extremely important and confidential. Then he left for the office. At work, Marcus and David prepared the trap. They created a complete set of fake documents about a non-existent merger between Chen Industries and a fictional Chinese manufacturing company. The documents looked completely authentic, with signatures, official stamps, and detailed financial projections. If Grace took these documents and passed them along to her handlers, David's team would be able to trace the leak. That evening, Marcus brought the fake documents home in his briefcase. He made a show of being stressed and preoccupied. At dinner, he barely ate, claiming he had too much work on his mind. Grace watched him with what seemed like genuine concern. She offered to keep Emma occupied so he could focus on his work. Marcus thanked her and retreated to his study. He spread the fake documents across his desk, making sure they were clearly visible. Then he opened his laptop and pretended to work while actually monitoring the security camera feed from his phone. He waited to see if Grace would take the bait. 2 hours passed. Emma was in bed and the house was quiet. Marcus sat in the darkness of his study, watching the camera feed. Then he saw movement. Grace appeared in the hallway outside his study. She paused at the door, listening. Marcus held his breath. Grace slowly opened the door and slipped inside. Marcus watched through the camera as she moved quickly to his desk. She pulled out a small camera from her pocket and began photographing the fake documents. She worked efficiently, her movements practiced and precise. This was clearly not her first time doing this. Marcus felt a mix of anger and satisfaction. They had caught her red-handed. But he stayed hidden and silent, letting her finish. After about 10 minutes, Grace put her camera away, carefully rearranged the papers exactly as they had been, and left the study as quietly as she had entered. Marcus waited another hour before emerging from his hiding spot. His heart was pounding, but his mind was clear. They had proof now. Grace was definitely a spy, and soon they would know where the information was going. The trap was set, and now all they had to do was wait for someone to spring it. The following morning, Marcus drove to the office earlier than usual. David was already waiting for him with a team of cybersecurity experts. They had spent the entire night monitoring all possible channels where the stolen information might surface. Their goal was to trace the path of the fake documents from Grace to whoever was pulling the strings. David explained that they had set up digital traps within the fake documents themselves. Invisible watermarks and tracking codes were embedded in the files. If anyone opened them on a computer or uploaded them to a cloud service, the team would know immediately. They would be able to see the location, the device, and potentially identify the person accessing the information. Marcus listened carefully as David outlined their strategy. The waiting was the hardest part. They needed Grace to pass along the information she had photographed, and they needed her handlers to make a move. Until then, Marcus had to continue pretending everything was normal at home. Throughout the day, Marcus tried to focus on his regular work, but his mind kept drifting back to Emma. His daughter was innocent in all of this, yet she had been used as a tool by dangerous people. He thought about all the times over the past months when Emma had gone to the park with Maria. All those moments when strangers had been teaching her a foreign language, grooming her to be useful in their scheme. By late afternoon, David rushed into Marcus's office with news. The tracking system had detected activity. Someone had opened the fake documents in Beijing, China. The cybersecurity team was able to pinpoint the exact building where the files were accessed. It was a commercial office tower in the financial district, home to dozens of companies including several tech firms. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Beijing. This was bigger than a rival American company trying to steal trade secrets. This had international implications. David immediately contacted his former colleagues at the FBI. Corporate espionage involving foreign entities was a matter of national security. Within 2 hours, 2 FBI agents arrived at Chen Industries headquarters, Special Agent Jennifer Morrison and Special Agent Robert Kim. introduced themselves and asked Marcus to explain everything from the beginning. Marcus walked them through the discovery of Grace speaking Mandarin, finding the security footage, and setting the trap with the fake documents. Agent Morrison asked detailed questions about Marcus's business dealings in China. She wanted to know which Chinese companies he worked with, which government officials he had met, and what kind of technology his company was developing. Marcus answered honestly, explaining that Chen Industries had several partnerships with legitimate Chinese tech firms and that his business was completely legal. Agent Kim focused on Grace. He asked for copies of all the security footage, her fake identification documents, and any other information Marcus had gathered. He explained that the FBI had been tracking several espionage rings operating on American soil, using domestic workers and seemingly ordinary people to infiltrate the homes of executives and government officials. The agents told Marcus that they would need to coordinate carefully. If they arrested Grace immediately, it might alert her handlers and cause them to shut down their entire operation. The FBI wanted to monitor Grace's communications and movements to identify everyone involved in the network. This meant Marcus would need to keep Grace in his home for a few more days while they gathered evidence. The thought of leaving his daughter alone with Grace for even one more day made Marcus's blood run cold, but he understood the bigger picture. If they could take down an entire espionage network, it might protect other families from going through what his had experienced. Agent Morrison assured Marcus that they would have undercover agents watching his house around the clock. If Grace made any move that seemed threatening toward Emma, they would intervene immediately. Marcus reluctantly agreed to cooperate, though every instinct told him to grab his daughter and run. That evening, Marcus returned home to find Emma and Grace baking cookies together. The kitchen smelled of vanilla and chocolate chips. Emma's face was dusted with flour, and she was laughing at something Grace had said. The scene looked so normal, so innocent. It made Marcus sick to think about the lies hiding beneath the surface. Grace greeted Marcus warmly and offered him a cookie fresh from the oven. He took it and forced himself to smile, to chat casually about his day at work. Inside, he was screaming. He wanted to confront her, to demand answers, to throw her out of his house. But he kept his composure. He had to trust that the FBI knew what they were doing. After Emma went to bed, Marcus sat in the living room pretending to watch television. Grace brought him tea and sat down in the armchair across from him. She asked if everything was all right, noting that he seemed stressed lately. Marcus told her it was just work pressure, a big deal that was making him anxious. Grace nodded sympathetically and said she hoped everything would work out. The irony of the moment was not lost on Marcus. Here was the woman who had infiltrated his home, used his daughter, and stolen his business secrets, offering him sympathy and comfort. She was playing her role perfectly, and he had to admit she was good at it. Over the next 3 days, the FBI worked tirelessly to build their case. They traced Grace's communications and discovered she was sending encrypted messages through a secure chat application. The messages were going to a handler in San Francisco, who then relayed information to contacts in Beijing. The network was more sophisticated than anyone had initially suspected. Agent Morrison called Marcus daily with updates. They had identified at least 6 other households in the area where similar operations were taking place. In each case, a domestic worker had been planted in the home of a tech executive or government contractor. The scale of the operation was staggering. On the 4th day, Marcus received a call that made his heart stop. Agent Kim informed him that they had identified the woman who had been meeting Emma in the park months ago. Her name was Lin Wei, and she was a trained intelligence operative working for the Chinese Ministry of State Security. She had left the country 2 weeks before Grace was hired, likely to avoid being identified once the active phase of the operation began. This was no longer just corporate espionage. This was foreign intelligence activity on American soil. The FBI was now coordinating with the Department of Justice and the State Department. What had started as Marcus discovering his maid speaking Mandarin had uncovered an international spy ring. Marcus struggled to process the magnitude of what was happening. His little girl had been targeted by foreign spies. They had spent months preparing her, teaching her Mandarin, making her comfortable with keeping secrets from her father. The thought made him physically ill. That evening, Marcus made a decision. He could not wait any longer. He did not care about the FBI's investigation or the bigger picture. His daughter's safety came first. He called Agent Morrison and told her he was taking Emma out of the house. If they wanted to continue surveilling Grace, they could do it without using his child as bait. Agent Morrison tried to convince him to wait just 2 more days. They were close to identifying the entire network and making arrests. But Marcus was firm. He had already packed bags for himself and Emma. They were leaving that night to stay at a hotel. The FBI could handle Grace however they wanted, but Emma would be safe. To his surprise, Agent Morrison agreed. She said the FBI had gathered enough evidence anyway. They were planning to execute arrest warrants the following morning. She thanked Marcus for his cooperation and assured him that Grace and everyone connected to her would be taken into custody soon. Marcus hung up and went to Emma's room. His daughter was sleeping peacefully, her stuffed animals arranged around her on the bed. He gently woke her and told her they were going on an adventure. Emma was confused but excited. She quickly got dressed while Marcus carried their bags to the car. As they prepared to leave, Grace appeared at the top of the stairs. She asked what was happening, where they were going. Marcus looked at her directly for the first time since discovering the truth. He told her they were going away for a few days. He did not offer any other explanation. Something shifted in Grace's expression. It was subtle, but Marcus saw it. The warm, caring nanny disappeared, and for just a moment he saw the cold professional underneath. Grace understood that something had changed. She nodded slowly and said she hoped they would have a good trip. Marcus took Emma's hand and walked out of the house. As he drove away, he looked in the rear-view mirror and saw Grace standing in the doorway, illuminated by the porch light. He knew this was the last time he would see her as a free person. They checked into a hotel downtown. Marcus ordered room service for Emma and let her watch cartoons while he sat by the window, his phone in his hand, waiting for news from the FBI. The city lights glittered below them, and Marcus thought about how quickly his entire world had been turned upside down. Around midnight, his phone rang. It was Agent Morrison. She told him that FBI agents had executed search and arrest warrants at multiple locations simultaneously. Grace had been taken into custody without incident at his house. 5 other domestic workers in the area had also been arrested. The handler in San Francisco and several other operatives had been picked up as well. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. It was over. Emma was safe. The people who had violated his home and manipulated his daughter were in custody. But even as the relief came, he knew the hard part was just beginning. He would have to explain to Emma what had happened, help her understand that Grace had not really been their friend. He would have to rebuild his daughter's sense of security and trust. He looked over at Emma, who had fallen asleep on the hotel bed, still wearing her shoes. Marcus gently removed them and covered her with a blanket. Tomorrow would be difficult, but tonight she was safe. That was all that mattered. The morning sun filtered through the hotel curtains when Marcus woke up. Emma was still sleeping beside him, her small chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then the events of the past few days came rushing back, and Marcus felt the weight of it all settle on his shoulders again. He ordered breakfast from room service and let Emma sleep a bit longer. When she finally woke up, she was confused about where they were. Marcus explained that they were staying in a hotel for a little while, that their house needed some work done. It was not the whole truth, but he was not ready to tell her everything yet. He wanted to talk to a child psychologist first, to get advice on the best way to help Emma process what had happened. After breakfast, Marcus received a call from Agent Morrison. She asked if he and Emma could come to the FBI field office that afternoon. There were some things they needed to discuss, and they wanted Emma to speak with a specialist who worked with children in cases like this. Marcus agreed, though his protective instincts made him hesitant about putting his daughter through any more stress. The FBI office was a tall, imposing building downtown. Agent Morrison met them in the lobby and escorted them to a comfortable room on the 3rd floor. It did not look like the interrogation rooms Marcus had seen in movies. Instead, it was decorated, like a family counseling center, with soft lighting, comfortable furniture, and toys in one corner. A woman introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Chen, a child psychologist who specialized in helping young victims of manipulation and espionage cases. She had kind eyes and a gentle manner that immediately put Emma at ease. Dr. Chen suggested that Emma play with some toys while she and Marcus talked privately for a few minutes. In an adjacent office, Dr. Chen explained to Marcus that children who had been used in espionage operations often experienced confusion and betrayal. Emma had formed a bond with Grace and had trusted her. Learning that Grace had been lying and using her would be traumatic. Dr. Chen advised Marcus to be honest with Emma, but to present the information in an age-appropriate way, focusing on the fact that Emma had done nothing wrong and that the adults had failed to protect her. Marcus felt guilt wash over him. He had been so focused on building his company, on providing financially for his daughter, that he had not seen the danger right in front of him. He had trusted Maria and then Grace without truly vetting them beyond standard background checks. He had missed the signs that something was wrong. Dr. Chen seemed to read his thoughts. She told him that these operatives were professionals trained to exploit trust and avoid detection. Even experienced security personnel had trouble identifying them. Marcus should not blame himself for what had happened. What mattered now was helping Emma heal and ensuring she felt safe again. After their conversation, Dr. Chen spent an hour with Emma alone. Marcus waited anxiously, wondering what his daughter was saying, how she was processing everything. When they emerged, Emma looked tired but calm. Dr. Chen told Marcus that Emma had shared some concerning things. The woman who met her in the Topama Park Linway had told Emma that learning Mandarin was a secret game, that if Emma told her father, the game would end and something bad would happen to people Emma cared about. This revelation made Marcus's hands clench into fists. They had not just manipulated his daughter but had threatened her, made her afraid of telling the truth. Emma had been carrying this burden for months, scared that if she said anything, someone would get hurt. No child should have to bear that kind of fear. Dr. Chen recommended regular therapy sessions for Emma over the next several months. She also suggested that Marcus consider relocating, at least temporarily, to give Emma a fresh start away from the house where so much had happened. Marcus agreed immediately. His company had offices in Seattle and Austin. Either city would be far enough from their current home to provide the distance they needed. Over the following days, more details about the operation emerged. Agent Morrison kept Marcus informed as the investigation progressed. Grace's real name was Michelle Torres, and she was actually an American citizen who had been recruited by Chinese intelligence during a study abroad program in Beijing 10 years earlier. She had been working as a deep cover operative ever since, taking jobs as a domestic worker in homes of people with access to valuable information. The previous nanny, Maria, had been recruited more recently. She had gambling debts, and the intelligence network had offered to pay them off in exchange for cooperation. Maria had not fully understood what she was getting involved in at first. She thought she was just facilitating language lessons for Emma. By the time she realized it was something more serious, she was in too deep. She had left the country out of fear, not to avoid detection. Marcus learned that the intelligence network had specifically targeted him because of his company's work on advanced encryption technology. Chen Industries was developing a new cybersecurity system that several government agencies were interested in purchasing. The Chinese government wanted access to that technology, and they had decided the easiest way to get it was through Marcus's home computer and documents. The fake merger documents Marcus had planted had actually helped the FBI immensely. When the information showed up in Beijing, Chinese intelligence had acted on it, making inquiries about the fictional company mentioned in the fake papers. These inquiries had exposed other assets in their network, leading to additional arrests both in the United States and abroad. Agent Kim told Marcus that his cooperation had helped prevent what could have been a massive breach of national security. The technology Chen Industries was developing would eventually be used to protect sensitive government communications. If it had been compromised, the consequences could have been catastrophic. Despite the praise from the FBI, Marcus felt hollow inside. Yes, they had stopped the spies and protected the technology, but the cost had been his daughter's innocence and sense of security. Emma now knew that people could pretend to care about her while actually using her. That was a hard lesson for anyone to learn, let alone an 8-year-old child. Marcus made arrangements to relocate to Seattle temporarily. He could manage his company remotely, and the Seattle office had been asking for more of his direct involvement anyway. The change would be good for both of them. His assistant began the process of packing up their home, and Marcus hired a new security consultant to do thorough background checks on anyone who would work in their new residence. Before they left, Marcus had one more meeting at the FBI office. Agent Morrison wanted to show him something. She led him to a small conference room where several photographs were spread across a table. The photos showed Grace, or Michelle as her real name was, during her arrest. But what caught Marcus's attention was a photo of Lin Wei, the woman who had been meeting Emma in the park. Agent Morrison explained that Lin Wei had been a priority target for American intelligence for years. She was a high-ranking operative who had run several successful operations in the United States. The FBI had been trying to identify and locate her for a long time. Thanks to Marcus's security footage, they now had clear images of her and had shared them with international law enforcement. While Lin Wei had left the country, she would no longer be able to operate freely without fear of recognition. Marcus studied the photo of Lin Wei. She looked ordinary, like someone's aunt or neighbor. That was what made these operatives so dangerous. They blended in perfectly, looking harmless while executing carefully planned operations. He thought about all the times Emma had played with this woman, laughing and learning, not knowing she was being groomed for espionage. The trial process would take months, Agent Morrison explained. Michelle Torres and the other arrested operatives would face charges of espionage, conspiracy, and identity theft. Some might cooperate and provide information about their handlers in exchange for reduced sentences. Others would likely remain silent following their training. Marcus would be called to testify at some point, but the FBI would try to shield Emma from having to appear in court. As Marcus prepared to leave the FBI office, Agent Kim pulled him aside. He told Marcus that the tech industry needed to be more aware of these threats. Foreign intelligence services were increasingly targeting private companies rather than government agencies because corporate security was often weaker. Marcus's story could help educate other executives about the risks and the tactics being used against them. Marcus agreed to speak at a closed-door security briefing for tech executives the following month. If sharing his experience could protect even one other family from going through what his had endured, it would be worth the discomfort of reliving the events. That evening, Marcus and Emma had dinner at a quiet restaurant near their hotel. Emma was quieter than usual, pushing food around her plate. Marcus asked her what she was thinking about. She looked up at him with eyes that seemed older than they had just a week ago. Emma asked if Grace had ever really liked her, or if it had all been pretending. The question broke Marcus's heart. He reached across the table and took his daughter's small hand in his. He told her that he honestly did not know what was real and what was an act, but what mattered was that Emma was real. Emma was good, and Emma was loved truly and completely by him. She nodded slowly, processing his words. Then she asked if she did something wrong by learning Mandarin and not telling him. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. He squeezed her hand gently and told her absolutely not. The adults had failed her, not the other way around. She had been manipulated by people who were very good at tricking others. She had nothing to feel guilty about. Emma seemed relieved by his answer. Some of the tension left her small shoulders. They finished their dinner, and Marcus let her order dessert, something chocolate and excessive that made her smile for the first time that day. As they walked back to the hotel, Emma slipped her hand into his. Marcus looked down at his daughter, so small and so brave. They had a long road ahead of them, healing and rebuilding, but they would do it together, and they would come out stronger on the other side. He was determined to make sure of that. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the balcony of their new apartment in Seattle, looking out at the city skyline. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the smell of coffee from the cafe below. Behind him, through the sliding glass door, he could hear Emma laughing at something on television. The sound still filled him with relief every time he heard it. The move to Seattle had been the right decision. The change of scenery had helped both of them start fresh. Emma was attending a new school where no one knew about what had happened. She had made friends quickly, and her teachers reported that she was doing well academically. The nightmares that had plagued her first few weeks after Grace's arrest had gradually faded. Dr. Chen had recommended a child therapist in Seattle, and Emma had been seeing her twice a week. The sessions seemed to be helping. Emma was learning to process what had happened and to understand that being manipulated did not mean she was weak or foolish. She was also learning to trust again, though Marcus knew that would take time. Marcus himself had been seeing a therapist as well. The guilt he felt about not protecting Emma had been overwhelming at first. He kept replaying moments in his mind, looking for signs he should have caught, questions he should have asked. His therapist had helped him understand that hindsight was always clearer than foresight, and that he had done the best he could with the information he had at the time. The trial proceedings were moving forward. Michelle Torres, the woman they had known as Grace, had decided to cooperate with prosecutors. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she was providing information about the intelligence network she had been part of. Her testimony had already led to several more arrests in different states. Agent Morrison had called Marcus last week to tell him that Lin Wei, the operative who had been teaching Emma in the park, had been detained in Singapore. International law enforcement had been tracking her movements, and she had finally made a mistake that allowed them to apprehend her. She would be extradited to face charges in the United States. It was a significant victory for the FBI and a relief for Marcus knowing she could not hurt any other families. Chen Industries had implemented sweeping new security measures. David Park had completely overhauled their protocols for protecting sensitive information. All executives underwent training on operational security and recognizing social engineering tactics. The company had also hired a firm specializing in vetting household employees for executives, using techniques that went far beyond standard background checks. Marcus had given his presentation at the security briefing for tech executives. The room had been full of people who ran companies similar to his, people who faced the same risks. Many had been shocked by his story, not realizing how sophisticated and patient these intelligence operations could be. Several attendees had approached him afterward, thanking him for sharing and asking for advice on protecting their own families. The experience had changed Marcus fundamentally. He was still driven and ambitious, but his priorities had shifted. He worked from home more often now, spending time with Emma before and after school. He had turned down 2 major deals that would have required extensive travel to China. The potential profits were not worth the risk or the time away from his daughter. Emma had expressed interest in continuing to learn Mandarin, which had surprised Marcus at first. Dr. Chen explained that this was actually a healthy sign. Emma was reclaiming something that had been used to hurt her and turning it into something positive that she controlled. Marcus had hired a legitimate tutor, a retired university professor who came highly recommended. Emma enjoyed her lessons and was making good progress on her own terms. One Saturday afternoon, Marcus took Emma to Pike Place Market. They walked through the bustling stalls, sampling fresh fruit and watching the fishmongers toss salmon back and forth. Emma was animated and happy, pointing out things she wanted to show him. At one point, she grabbed his hand and pulled him toward a flower stand. The vendor, an elderly woman with kind eyes, greeted them warmly. Emma carefully selected a bouquet of sunflowers, counting out her allowance money to pay for them. As they walked away, Emma told Marcus the flowers were for their apartment, to make it feel more like home. Marcus felt his heart swell with love for his resilient daughter. That evening, they cooked dinner together, something they had been doing more often. Emma was learning to make simple dishes, and she took pride in helping. As they ate the pasta she had helped prepare, Emma asked Marcus about his work. She wanted to know what kind of technology his company made and why it was important. Marcus explained it in simple terms, telling her that Chen Industries helped protect information so that bad people could not steal it. Emma nodded thoughtfully and said she thought that was good work, that everyone deserved to have their private things stay private. Her mature understanding of the concept impressed Marcus. His daughter had learned hard lessons, but she was using them to develop wisdom beyond her years. Later that night, after Emma was in bed, Marcus sat in his home office reviewing security reports from David. Everything looked clean. There had been no further attempts to infiltrate his company or his home. The arrests had apparently sent a message that Chen Industries was not an easy target anymore. Marcus thought about how different his life looked now compared to 6 months ago. He had been so focused on growing his business, on competing in the global marketplace, that he had not seen the danger until it was almost too late. Now he understood that success meant nothing if you lost what truly mattered in the pursuit of it. His phone buzzed with a message from Agent Morrison. The trial date had been set for Michelle Torres and the other defendants. Marcus would need to testify in 3 months. He replied, confirming his availability and thanking her for the update. He was ready to face Michelle in court, to look at her and show her that she had not broken his family despite her best efforts. The next morning, Marcus woke to find Emma already up and dressed. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her Mandarin workbook, practicing characters. She looked up when he entered and smiled. She told him she had been working on a surprise for him, something she wanted to show him when she was ready. Marcus made them breakfast while Emma continued studying. As he scrambled eggs, he reflected on how far they had come. There were still challenges ahead. The trial would be difficult. Emma would likely need therapy for years to fully process her experiences. Trust would always be a little harder for both of them now, but they were healing and they were doing it together. A few weeks later, on Marcus's birthday, Emma presented him with her surprise. She had written him a letter in Mandarin and translated it into English. The letter talked about how much she loved him, how she knew he worked hard to take care of her, and how she felt safe because he was her father. She had illustrated it with drawings of the two of them in Seattle, in their new home, starting their new life. Marcus read the letter 3 times, his eyes blurring with tears. He pulled Emma into a tight hug and told her it was the best birthday present he had ever received. She hugged him back just as tightly, and in that moment Marcus knew they were going to be all right. The trial came and went. Marcus testified about what he had discovered, providing evidence that helped convict Michelle Torres and the others involved. Michelle received a 15-year sentence for espionage. The handler in San Francisco got 20 years. Other operatives received varying sentences based on their level of involvement and cooperation. Lin Wei, when she was finally extradited and tried, refused to cooperate at all. She maintained her silence throughout the proceedings and was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Agent Morrison told Marcus that Lin Wei's arrest had dealt a significant blow to Chinese intelligence operations in the United States. Several networks had gone dormant or shut down entirely after her capture. A year after the initial discovery, Marcus and Emma traveled back to their old city for a day. They drove past their former house, which Marcus had sold to a young couple with no children. The new owners had repainted it and installed a swing set in the backyard. It looked happy and normal, no trace of the darkness that had once lived there. Emma looked at the house thoughtfully and then turned to Marcus. She said she was glad they had moved, that Seattle felt like home now. Marcus agreed. Sometimes you had to leave the past behind to build a better future. They visited Maria's old apartment building, but Maria had never returned from the Philippines. Agent Morrison had told Marcus that Maria was cooperating with authorities from abroad, providing information through video testimony. She had expressed deep remorse for her role in the operation and had sent a letter of apology that Marcus had decided not to share with Emma. Some things were better left in the past. As they drove back to the airport, Emma fell asleep in the passenger seat. Marcus glanced over at her peaceful face and felt grateful for everything they had been through. It had tested them, broken them down, and forced them to rebuild. But they had emerged stronger and closer than before. Chen Industries continued to thrive under Marcus's leadership, now with robust security measures that had become a model for other tech companies. Marcus had been invited to speak at industry conferences about corporate security and protecting against espionage. He accepted some invitations and declined others, always prioritizing time with Emma over professional obligations. 2 years after the incident, Emma started high school. She had grown into a confident young woman who knew her own mind. She was still learning Mandarin and had even joined the